5 gang members all facing life sentences. Yep, you heard that right. Life behind bars with no chance of parole. Crazy, right? Well, today we're sitting down to tell the stories of these guys, and let me tell you, it's a rollercoaster of emotions. From shock to regret and remorse to sadness, trust me, you don't want to miss this. Let's start with number 5, Abel Gallegos. Now, Abel Candy Gallegos is one of the most notorious gang members out there. He was sentenced to life in prison 2020 without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, and let me tell you, his reaction was something else. Abel, along with his partners in crime Alonso Quintana and Rene Francisco Rosales, were found guilty on multiple counts after a 3-week trial that had over 50 witnesses and a whopping 400 pieces of evidence. The details that came out in court were bone-chilling to say the least. Turns out, Abel and his gang labeled 28-year-old Simone Reyna Duran a snitch for identifying Quintana in a lineup for a shooting she had witnessed. And what did Abel do? He set up a meeting, luring Duran to his house in Denver, where he and his gang assaulted her in the backseat of a car. But that wasn't enough for these heartless criminals. They then drove her to Golden, where they shot her not once, not twice, but 10 times. But wait, it gets worse. They poured gasoline on her body and set it on fire. Yeah, you heard that right. They set her on fire. And do you know what's even more disturbing? When Judge Philip McNulty delivered the sentence, Abel showed no signs of remorse. None at all. In fact, he had the audacity to tell his family and friends in the courtroom, "I love you all, I'm sorry." Sorry? Sorry for what? Mercilessly taking a life? For leaving a family shattered and a community in shock? Sorry just doesn't cut it, Abel. But do you know what Judge McNulty had to say about it? He told Abel that there was absolutely nothing mitigating about this case and that the maximum sentence was well deserved. He even scolded Abel's family and friends for shedding tears, saying that if there were any tears, they should be shed for Mrs. Duran, who had no choice in this brutal crime. Number 4, the Carpio brothers. You see, these brothers, Anthony and Michael, were involved in the murder of Kevin Orellana, a young 18-year-old who was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. He was on the handball courts on the campus of Cleveland High School in Reseda, where Michael started the fight and Anthony, the younger brother, took it to a whole new level. Anthony, only 16 years old at the time, pulled out a knife and stabbed Orellana not once, not twice, but 10 times. Can you believe that? In the head, neck, and left and right torso. It was a senseless and brutal act, and if that wasn't enough, both Michael and Anthony were convicted of second-degree murder with a gang allegation. But here's where things get complicated. In 2016, Proposition 57 changed the law, allowing minors to be transferred to criminal court, but with a final decision to be made by a judge. However, due to Gascon's blanket youth justice policy, Anthony's case remained in juvenile court, and he was released from custody. Can you believe that? After committing such a heinous crime, Anthony was back on the streets, free to roam around. Now, the Carpio brothers reacted to their life sentence in quite an obvious manner, just like any other teenager. When the judge pronounced the verdict, Anthony and Michael were in shock. Their faces turned pale and their eyes widened with disbelief. It was a moment of realization for them that their actions had severe consequences. They were going to spend the rest of their lives behind bars, paying for the crime they committed. And that's when remorse kicked in. Anthony, a once hot-headed teenager, now realized the gravity of his actions. He couldn't believe the irreversible damage he had caused, not only to Kevin Orellana and his family, but also to his own life. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, and he couldn't help but feel regret for the choices he made. As for Michael, the older brother, when he received his life sentence, he couldn't hold back the tears. It was a moment of vulnerability that he had never experienced before. He realized that his actions not only cost him his freedom, but also shattered the lives of those around him, including his own family. Number 3, Kenneth Hill, Jomar Robinson, and Darius Diaz Gaskin. After weeks of trial, the jury found them guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, armed robbery, felony firearm possession, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. It's no surprise considering the brutal crime they committed. These guys were responsible for the murder of Basim Sulaka, the owner of a party store in Clinton Township. During the night of the crime, these 3 convicts stormed into the store with guns blazing. Basim Sulaka, just doing his job, stood up, and in less than 20 seconds, he was shot in the back with Diaz Gaskin's handgun. Basim's sister, Vivian Sulaka, spoke up in court. She described her brother as a peaceful man who never kept a gun in his store, and he always told his employees just to hand over the money if a robbery happened. He believed that money comes and goes, but life is precious. It's just so tragic that he didn't even get a chance to defend himself or negotiate. But these 3 convicts took away his life without any remorse. During closing arguments, Diaz Gaskin's lawyer, Richard Glander, tried to defend his client, saying that he thought the gun safety was on and the shot went off accidentally while he was trying to stop Grayson from attacking Sulaka. Basim's family and friends were devastated, and they were not buying it. Glander even read a letter from Diaz Gaskin, where he said he was sorry from the bottom of his heart and wished he could take it all back. Meanwhile, the 2 other gang members, Hill and Robinson, also tried to defend themselves. Hill's lawyer, Jeffrey Collins, claimed that his client didn't even go into the store and never possessed a gun. He admitted to being the driver in the getaway car, but denied any direct involvement in the crime. Robinson's lawyer, Joseph Kosmala, argued that his client never intended for any of this to happen and didn't have a gun. But the truth is, they were all there, part of the same plan, and they all played a role in taking Basim's life away. Number 2. George G. Weld Thomas. Now, George G. Weld Thomas was one of the most untouchable gangsters. Now, Thomas had just been slapped with a life sentence, and it wasn't just him. 6 of his henchmen got the same fate, locked up for life too. When the judge read out the sentence, Thomas didn't even flinch. He just stood there with his arms folded, nodding like he didn't have a care in the world. No remorse, no regrets. And get this, Thomas actually ran his criminal empire from behind bars. This guy made over 30,000 phone calls from his cell between 2008 and 2010, planning murders and other crimes. He turned the prisons into his own personal headquarters, calling the shots and instilling fear wherever he could. But the judge saw right through his facade. She said he showed no remorse, that he willingly and deliberately carried out hits to terrorize the community. Now, this sentence was a victory in the war against organized crime, no doubt. The National Prosecuting Authority is celebrating this sentence, and rightly so. Finally, number 1, David Parga. Now, he is a notorious gang member who made headlines for gunning down an unarmed college student, Leland Washington, outside a Halloween party in La Habra 8 years ago. And he got sentenced to life in prison, 50 years to be exact. Yep, you heard that right. The maximum punishment for taking a young man's life for no apparent reason. Now, in the courtroom, Leland's family poured their hearts out, expressing their pain and grief. His brother, Willie Washington III, who was also his best friend, stood up and spoke about how much he missed his older brother. And what made it even more tragic was that Leland had no gang ties. He was just invited by his friends to the party, minding his own business. But Parga, in his gang mentality, took offense to the fact that Leland and his friends had returned to the party after being kicked out. He thought it was disrespectful to his gang. So he walked up to Leland, pulled out his gun, and shot him 4 times with a .22 caliber pistol. Just like that, a young man with a bright future ahead of him bled to death. Now, the judge didn't hold back either. He called Parga a coward for his cowardly act. Walking up to an unarmed man and shooting him for no reason, that's as cold-blooded as it gets. When Parga finally spoke, he directed his comments to Leland's grieving mother, Bessie Washington. He said that he was sorry for what happened to her son, but that's not going to bring her son back. Anyway, he got what he deserved, a life sentence behind bars with no chance of parole for 50 years. Anyway, what do you guys think about these 5 convicts? Did they get what they deserved? Do drop what you guys think in the comments below. We'll meet again in another episode.